it's tumultuous right now. And so that being that it's tumultuous and it's a pivotal time, you're a Democrat, you're in a Republican-controlled Congress. So let's talk about what are the challenges that you see going forward being in that environment?
In that predicament.
Yeah, and how you're going to be able to carry out, I don't want to use the word agenda, but those promises that you made and the things that you talked about in your campaign, the environment, the things that are important to us here in the district.
Well, certainly I understand being a freshman and being in the minority, the challenge that brings with it in terms of being able to move forward legislation, especially when there's a difference on many of the issues that I believe are germane to the district here on the Central Coast. Climate change issues, issues that, as it relates to offshore oil drilling and many other issues like that. But you know, I'm an optimist, and I, despite being in the minority, hope that that I can establish relationships and at least find a few members that might be willing to work with me. But this is a learning experience. I've been there a whopping 25 days or so, and I'm just learning the protocols and all that's entailed in setting up our office so that I could represent our constituents here in the 24th Congressional District in the most effective way. But clearly, being in the minority, you understand your place in the pecking order of leadership. So,
have you had a chance to reach across that aisle and to form any of those relationships that will help carry forward to be able to make a change?
Absolutely.
Yes.
As a freshman, you attend a number of weeks bipartisan orientations. And for example, at the end of my second week of orientation in Washington, Majority Leader McCarthy reached out to some of us freshmen from California and had a breakfast and talked about just the lay of the land in Washington and his openness to have discussions on an ongoing basis. I thought that was very positive. One of the weeks of orientation was in Harvard, or at Harvard, should I say, and there was a tone of bipartisanship amongst us as freshmen. Obviously, this is our honeymoon, so everybody seems to be open to collaborating and breaking sort of that cultural gridlock that I think everybody has come to despise about Washington. And we were told by the individuals leading the Institute in Harvard that there seemed to be a different tone with our freshman class, a willingness to work together. Of course, some of us said that's what they tell every class. But, you know, I've gotten to know a number of my colleagues from the other side in my freshman class, and have already started building those relationships as well. I've already co-sponsored my first bill with the Representative Valadao from Northern California on a bill dealing with theft identity and the potential for fraud. Federal agencies has come to light that they traditionally add individuals' social security numbers when they do mailings. Some agencies do. Being concerned about identity theft and fraud, period. This was something that was a no-brainer and innocuous, and something that I thought would be a good start to work together and build those relationships.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about California's position and where we are versus where Trump's position, and we've kind of dug our heels in. The governor, had his State of the State address yesterday, I believe it was, and he was pretty adamant about that we won't back down, and we're gonna put a stronghold, and we're not going to, how do I want to say, that Trump's policies won't take effect in California. So how do you see your position in Congress?
Well, clearly, if this president puts forth policies that are in conflict with the values here in California or here on the Central Coast, I'm going to be a loud voice against them and vote against them. But I think that what I am finding as a freshman member of Congress, and with members from the media and regular average citizens here on the Central Coast and throughout our country is that this president tends to spout out a lot of rhetoric about a lot of different issues. And the first question that I think everybody tries to decipher is, how much is this just rhetoric? How much of it is within his executive order authority or his authority as the leader of the executive branch? And how much of it is just rhetoric because you need legislative action to accomplish it? For example, we heard about this 20% tariff.
Right, I wanted to talk about that.
Well, guess what? You need congressional action for that. So he has a lot of things that he puts forth, but a lot of it needs congressional action. And I'm hopeful that irrespective of being in the minority, that the majority party, there will be a substantial number of individuals, members of Congress, that will think that some of these policies are not good policies and will vote against it. Keep in mind in the Senate, there's only 3 votes that separates that majority from the minority. And I think you're going to find that it's not always going to be a slam dunk for this president to move forward with some of the misguided policies that I think are misguided, in him being able to move forward with those. And of course, if there's ever something constructive that he puts forward, I'm not an ideologue. If it improves the lives of families here on the Central Coast and is a positive proposal, I'm more than glad to find common ground.
So talking about improving lives, he's talked a lot about immigration and his 20% and building that wall. If he was to do that, that wouldn't improve lives here on the Central Coast. Is it frustrating? I know you say you're an optimist, but it must feel pretty defeating.
It is, but I still go back to the way you fix a lot of our challenges is through comprehensive immigration reform. That's the solution. Clearly he's putting forth proposals that I think are symbolic at best about hate and xenophobia. A wall, I think, does little to really strengthen our national security. There's other methods to strengthen our borders, technology, more personnel, that I think could be more effective. But this is merely a boondoggle, waste of taxpayer money, where we could actually take those resources and use for other very important needs here domestically, and as well as even our national defense. You want a wall or you want an aircraft carrier? What kind of things are a higher priority? And there's limited resources to go around. So, I'm hopeful that he abandons some of his misguided policies and really focuses on bringing this country together and not appeasing to this base that he appeased to during his campaign.
Has there, and I know it's very fresh in his tenure as president as well as the whole Congress and Senate. Has there been any talk about true immigration reform? Has there just been this talk about let's put up this wall and let's ban Muslims from coming in this country and that's going to solve all of our problems?
Well, again, I've only been there a little more than 3 weeks. There has been talk about the Bridge Act in a bipartisan way, both the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives. And that, for example, is a piece of legislation that would codify President Obama's executive order for Dreamers, the DACA youth. And that's something that seems to be going forward in a bipartisan way. So there is some talk in Congress, but of course, then there's the president who has to sign that piece of legislation. So it's all a very tenuous environment.
Okay. And so has H-2A come up at all? Because I know that, again, that's been something that's been out there for a long time and talking about reforming that program. And again, I know it's so early on, but has it something that even came up before you got sworn in? Or did you talk about that in those meetings that you had?
No, H-2A, no. I've heard it mentioned here or there, but again, I will say the real solution to solving our labor needs for agriculture and addressing many of these issues that we identify exist with immigration is through comprehensive immigration reform. Anything less is really piecemeal. Even the Bridge Act, it's single issue. But The H-2A program sounds like a fix, but it's only a Band-Aid. And more importantly, if we look at the Bracero program that my father was a part of in the 50s, you know, this would by default create a de facto Bracero program if you expanded the H-2A program. And quite frankly, I would have concerns about the issues that were plaguing the previous Bracero program: labor violations, human rights and civil rights. Those issues were very alive and well. My father used to tell me stories of what he had to go through being in that program. Yet it provided opportunity to him on one hand, but it was fraught with a lot of issues that were not thought out in establishing that program. So I would hope that we move forward with comprehensive immigration reform. And if there was an interest and a movement on the H-2A program, they would have to give consideration to those serious issues that existed with previous programs.
And
again, it should be a win-win if something like that ever goes forward, not only for the growers, but for the rights of the workers.
what do you see as the issues that you feel the need to stand up for in Congress for us here in the 24th District?
Well, one is for, I think, immigrant rights and their contributions to our economy and our society. I don't think that immigrants are all rapists and drug dealers, as Mr. Trump has said. And I think it's really unfortunate that he has created this xenophobia and hate towards immigrants. I find it repugnant that he's done that. And I will stand up and be a loud voice for the contributions that immigrants have made, as my family made, and I have made as a citizen now of the United States. That's one. Mm-hmm. The other one is women's rights. I think, there's already talk about defunding Planned Parenthood through the budget reconciliation process. There's talk about H.R. 7 was promulgated and voted on. I voted against it, to defund family planning of NGOs and countries that receive aid internationally. I hope to be able to stand up and push for a reasonable regulatory framework that protects public health, water, air, and also reinforces the important issue of climate change. It's something that is real. And even if my colleagues from the other party across the aisle, there's not a preponderance of agreement that it's man patterns that necessitate resources and adaptation. And we should be able to find common ground somewhere on addressing climate change, weaning ourselves from fossil fuels and moving towards a renewable energy sources is another area. Fighting for Social Security and Medicare, fighting to not have the Affordable Care Act repealed, and if unsuccessful, at least ensuring that something is put in place that hopefully will be at least as good as what we have now. I will be doing everything possible to advocate for that. Jobs, economic prosperity and opportunity continues to be a big one. So how can we bring about more opportunities? In San Luis Obispo, for example, the closure of Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Plant necessitates the retraining of employees that will be displaced. As the agreement achieved, investment in renewable energy technology, as well as the storage of the spent fuel rods, for safety reasons and also for storage in general. So the climate change, immigration, civil rights, women's rights, economic opportunity, and environmental protection.
So kind of circling around and talking about that economic opportunity, and you sitting on is it the Budget Appropriations Committee?
Budget Committee and the Armed Services Committee.
Okay, talking about that Budget Committee, will that allow you to be able to, I don't know if lobby is the right word, but to be able to, I'll use the word
be part of the debate and discourse.
Yeah, and to be able to get federal funds to our district for things like alternative energy sources, like the Coyama solar field, and maybe we would do another solar project in San Luis Obispo County because Diablo goes away, and we need more head of household jobs because that is the the main provider of head of household jobs. And so when that's gone, 1,500 head of household jobs are going to be gone.
Well, I think that's the real question for me as a freshman. As I move forward to implement a legislative agenda for the Central Coast, being in the minority, what are the type of partnerships, relationships that might be able to achieve certain things for the Central Coast? And some could be administrative through various grants, and some legislatively. But as I'm learning, sort of maneuvering through this new maze in Washington will be key.
Right, okay.
I left one thing out.
Yeah, of course.
You mentioned priorities. Another priority is education. When you consider the future of our workforce, the importance of individuals having access to higher education and being able to deal with student debt, that's another important issue.
Right, you have two major universities in your district.
Yes, Cal Poly and UCSB.
Right, and then you have a lot of community colleges too.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And speaking of that, you have a really large district, and Lois was president from one end of that district to the other. So kind of talk to me a little bit about how do you plan to cover that whole district, because not only do you have all of Santa Barbara County, right? So you have all of SLO County, and then you have that sliver of Ventura as well, right? Yes. But then you have your responsibilities in Washington. So, so talk to me about what's your plan, Salud?
Well, my plan is to come back almost every week.
Really?
Like Lois used to do.
Okay.
And as I have already started doing, I was here a week and a half ago, and I traversed the entire Central Coast.
Okay.
From San Luis Obispo County all the way through Santa Barbara County and Ventura as well. And I'm just going to continue to do that as often as possible. Come back and meet with as many constituency groups, members of the media, everybody that I can meet with, to make sure that I'm being a good listener and I'm hearing what's important to people, what keeps them up at night, and to make sure that I'm very visible and accessible, and make sure that we're providing the best constituent service possible.
And talk to me about what would you say the biggest thing you've learned in those 20 plus days that you've sat in Congress?
That when one party has the complete control, transparency and usual procedure goes out the door. There's been a number of issues that have not gone through committees for debate and discussion. They've been brought directly to the floor. One is the REINS Act. No debate, just brought for discussion. Another one was the procedural vote to embark on the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. It didn't go through committee. It went through just directly to the floor. So what I have found is that as a freshman, there's a lot of things you vote on, but usually it's things that have worked their way through the process. And some of these things that are being brought to me, I'm constantly scrambling to understand what it is, because there hasn't been any debate. So I've been trying to make sure I understand what I'm voting on. I put forth an amendment for the Affordable Care Act on the floor, and it wasn't considered. One that would have allowed, if they move forward with the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, that certain states would be exempted and continue to get resources if they wanted to continue to have their exchanges and their framework in place. That wasn't even considered because it circumvented the committee debate and brought it straight to the floor. The majority party in the middle of the night voted to bring to the floor, which they didn't, the abolishment of the Congressional Office on Ethics, but the American public roared back and it didn't go forward. So things like that. That's what I'm learning. I guess that's been the most significant surprise. The second one is that as a freshman, there is just so much information to synthesize and digest and learn that it's an ongoing learning process.
Yes.
So.
And then real quick, can we talk about the environment here in our district? And I know you're having your press conference tomorrow with the oil, and so kind of talk to me about how, as our congressional representative, that you can help protect that for us.
Well, I think it's working with local governments and all stakeholders to make sure that the environmental policies continue to exist locally, that federally there continues to be, while I'm in the minority and this is a different climate, that there's advocacy for making sure that these issues are at the forefront. The need to invest in renewable energy, the need to, as with my first bill that I'm going to sponsor, that we do everything possible to demonstrate our willingness to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels, such as my bill, that the California Clean Coast Act, that will ban the leasing of oil leases off the California coast, and thereby stopping permanently the future development of oil off our coast. So, it's one of those things that there's a partnership between the state, the local community, and the federal government, and we all have a piece in it. And I hope to be able to do my part at the federal government.